look at those and share those and explain what information they need from us to go in one direction or the other and just try something.
Okay, Madam Chair, if I may begin, Ken Strasma.
Yes, Ken, go ahead.
In a minute, I'll turn over to my colleague Zach Combs to discuss the specific districts. But as an overview of the process, we looked at the amount of population that was in common in the largest overlapping portion of the districts from each of the 3A and 3B Senate lands. In the Southwest, following the criteria about population equality and not splitting counties, independent cities and towns, both teams of mappers came up with very close to the same districts. We'll show a map in a minute that highlights those districts, and we've also highlighted the small areas where there were disagreements. The districts were either exact matches or close enough that we felt comfortable adopting the 3A, Mr. Morgan's configuration, and numbering in those districts. Of the remaining districts, there are some that are fairly close in terms of population. We're talking about 80% or so. But it wasn't possible to make those changes wholesale because of the ripple effects. If we have a district that's 80% similar, surrounded by others that are 80% similar, the differences very, very quickly add up, and we end up with districts that are entirely dissimilar from the others. We were directed to look at districts that were close to consensus, and we did not want to overstep that direction by making larger changes. Also, because the differences in most of the non-controversial districts have to do with geography we split. Many districts have one county split in order to achieve population equality. Our maps may have split one county while Mr. Morgan split another. The choices could be equally valid. So we felt it would be best to see what the Bay's direction regarding communities of interest told us. If one area spoke up strongly about not wanting to be split, while another was telling the commission they have more in common with a neighborhood across the county line, that's something we should take into account when reconciling these maps. I believe a logical next step would be for us to look at making larger changes to our map, taking into account both Mr. Morgan's approach and the public input regarding communities of interest. I do want to highlight that if that's what the commission wants us to do, the end product, unlike today's, would not be consensus maps, but rather our team's proposal of what we might call compromise districts. That would, of course, have to be reviewed by the other mapping team and the commission. In terms of timeline, I know the commission's anxious to see consensus districts for the state house as well, similar to the process we did over the last couple of days for the Senate. We can work on that over the next 36 hours. We, of course, plan to work through the weekend ahead of Monday's meeting, but I know DLS needs maps from us by Friday if they're to be made available to the public before Monday's meeting. So with that in mind, I'd suggest that we focus on State House pure consensus districts, similar to what we're presenting today for the Senate, and get those DLS by close of business Friday. Then we could turn to working on proposed Senate compromise districts and making changes based on the public input regarding communities of interest and any other direction that we get from the commission today. And at this point, let me hand it over to Zach.
May I, just before you turn it over to Zach, may I make a comment at this stage, please?
Absolutely. Go ahead, John.
So since we're talking here at the general level, and you'll see the map that they're going to present, and I generally agree that there are some districts that are clearly very, very similar, and the populations are very, very well aligned, and it may just be the simple decision to cut one county and not another, and that's probably something that's fairly easily resolved. But regarding some of the incumbent questions that were raised earlier, the co-chair pointed out that there may be some adjustments that can be made fairly easily. And what I would suggest is, to Mr. Strasma's point, one of the next steps may be for the individual map teams to try to resolve some of these other issues in the same way we're trying to resolve districts that we agree on. We can independently take a stab at some simple movement of territory regarding incumbency. And I think that, rather than try to force a consensus on districts that may be changed substantially or even, somewhat, that you probably want to allow us the chance to address some of the incumbency issues and then try to come to a consensus. Because some changes are minor. And, like, for example, I would describe Senator Barker's changes as involving a few districts, but very easy to accomplish without really adjusting any of the outer borders or subdividing any additional political subdivisions. So in that sense, solutions like that could be offered pretty quickly. And I think it would be a good idea for the individual map teams to put their best work forward on resolving some of those issues and then try to move to consensus. But again, to Mr. Strasman's point, there still may be in the delegate map some districts that are very similar that we can look at in the way we're about to look at. So I just wanted to make those general comments at this point.
And that was John Morgan?
Yeah, sorry, John Morgan with the Republican map drawing team.
Madam Chair, Ken Strassman again.
Yes.
I agree with what Mr. Morgan said. While we've been trying to leave incumbents for last in this process, and we're looking at it in the consensus process this week, knowing that we are under such a tight timeline and that districts may have to be revised, I think it makes absolute sense to look at that as part of the compromise process.
Okay.
And
thank you.
at this point, was there further questions or discussion? If not, Zach can bring up the map.
Well, let me see. Does anyone here have any questions right now? Or can they wait until we kind of start going into it? And if there's a problem, you can buzz in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Delegate Simon.
Just about what John was saying. So I think what he was suggesting is before you try, he basically wants to take another stab at his maps. He now that he's got the incumbent addresses and political data, he does want to go ahead and put his best work forward, is what I heard. I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding. It sounds like he'd like to, before we start looking for these consensus districts, to take at least one more pass through and be having that negotiation with his best possible map. Is that what I heard him say, or am I misunderstanding or misinterpreting or adding my own bias to that?
I think that is part of it, in combination also with more information that they're going to get on Monday. And the map drawers have expressed, I will say, everybody wants more information and believes they can do better work with more data. Is that
yes?
correct?
If I may respond to that, yes, Delegate Simon, that's exactly the sort of effort I'm suggesting. And I'm just using Senator Barker's example because it's one that we've seen publicly and it's fairly easy to understand. There are other instances where literally moving one precinct one way and one precinct another way resolves an incumbent pairing. So I think that's the sort of thing that could be done. And then what I would suggest is that once those relatively simple changes that could be incorporated in a map are made in a proposed map, then you could look at the areas that would require more additional movement than just a precinct or two or one county for another county. And we could bring to the commission essentially an idea or a resolution possibility. So for example, if I were to resolve a dozen incumbent splits in this next map, or incumbent pairings in this next map, then I might be able to also say, and here's 4 additional options that you could consider if you wanted to. So I could bring those, decision points forward to the commission. And the last thing I'd say is just to bring our legal team in. We have Lori Ann on our team here, and I think that she would be able to say that, we can work with the legal teams to bring things together after we've had a chance to make another set of maps to propose them. I think once we do that, then we will have taken into account a lot of information, incumbency, some political considerations as directed. And then I think in the framework that the commission has been using with using the 2 legal teams to bring consensus along, I think that would be the way we would do that at that point. Is that right? Go ahead, Gloria.
Yes, and this is Lori Ann Paradise with Taylor English Duma. I would agree with John. I think the more direction as to the incumbency issues that have already been discussed this morning would be exceedingly helpful in moving things forward and giving some guidance to both of the map drawers. So I would agree.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kumar?
Madam Chair, it sounds to me that, what we're hearing is, it sounds like this makes sense for a purpose of efficiency. Instead of trying to resolve, we've got all these different criteria, and they're not just in rank order. They all have to be considered in almost a circular fashion, that if we're asking the map drawers to compromise as much as possible, and if they're splitting, a jurisdiction here and there, and they may spend hours talking about that, and we may have to spend hours deciding that, that might be resolved by considering, well, if we move this one precinct, the incumbency issue solves that issue in a more holistic approach. I'm certainly not for considering an incumbency before it's absolutely necessary, but it sounds like given our timeline, it may be the time to use this in that matter. We still have the benchmark set of maps that were initially drawn and presented last week. If we see wild deviations to account for incumbents, then I think we know and the public will know that that's kind of the motivation. So it makes sense to me that we should be asking them to take a holistic approach as they're considering compromise at this point, instead of doing it step by step, which could take forever.
Madam Chairman, I have a question for Meg.
Senator McDougall?
Meg, I just heard, I don't know if it was Mr. Strassman and Mr. Morgan say that y'all had to have the maps by Friday afternoon to get them out to the public. I guess that goes to one of the concerns I expressed earlier, is that we're trying to do speed, but it seems to me if they had some Saturday and even, I hate to do it to them, but potentially Sunday, we're not meeting now till Monday afternoon. Isn't it better to go through and take the time to get those up? I want to see them as quickly as possible, but if I'm hearing what both map drawers are saying, if they had the time to work through that instead of just 36 hours, they might be able to do a better job. When do you actually have to have things to get it up to how long do you have to have them to get it loaded for the public?
So once, Madam Chair, Senator McDougall, once we receive the shape files and the block assignment files from the map drawers, it's a couple hours to get it online and to put the shape files online, and then to also have the reports and everything run. We're not meeting until Monday at 1. I think it is perfectly acceptable for them to get us everything, midday Saturday, so that we can get it online Saturday afternoon, and then the public and you all have all of Sunday and Monday morning to review.
That was Meg Lamb. Mr. Abrinio?
Madam Chair, James Abrinio. I just want to make sure I understand kind of what that would entail as far as incorporating incumbent address considerations. Are we talking about doing it all, the entire state that way now, or are we working? Because right now I'm seeing a partial map for Senate map from the west of the state towards the east. Are we talking about doing it all at once, I guess is my question.
This is John Morgan. Since I suggested this, I would say I would want to take a holistic approach as discussed and really try to resolve as many incumbency issues in one map as possible, and then come back through our legal team with a handful of other possibilities rather than drawing 6 more maps that address 6 more incumbency issues. I think I could lay out either a series of steps or just a concept to say, well, if you take this county or 20% of this district into this district, which is a major change, that I could lay out a series of other steps you could take. But those first efforts, I think both map drawing teams would benefit from having a little time to make some minor adjustments that fit very well inside the criteria that we've been using so far. So I think the commission would benefit from us taking our best efforts at that in one more map.
Madam Chair, Ken Strassman. I'm
going to go to Ms. Harris, and then you can respond to all of it.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We are less than 2 weeks before we are looking to have final maps here. And so what I'm hearing from both map drawers is more data allows them to be more comprehensive during this period of compromised map drawing. So I think at this point, we've released all of the data that is available, with the one exception of giving guidance on minority majority districts. And in lieu of the map drawers coming up Saturday, Sunday, whenever they want to finish it up and post it, and then we have to come back and redo them again because we have not considered minority majority districts, seems inefficient, and it feels morally corrupt in that we've had two independent, nonpartisan analyses of the current maps thus far that both have indicated that we are going backwards when it comes to citizens of color having the full ability to vote for candidates of their choice. I understand that we have additional data coming on Monday, but at this point, why are we waiting another 4 days? We have data, and we just need to give guidance to the map drawers to begin to leverage the state constitution of Virginia, which says where, what is that word? Practicable, thank you, practicable, that the map drawers should look at minority majority districts, coalition districts, and minority opportunity districts. And if we have given the incumbent addresses and allowing that to be utilized in the map drawing process, why in the hell aren't we offering up guidance to allow that type of analyses to go in during this compromise process? I will say that my mom was born in 1930, and she didn't get the chance to vote, basic right in this Commonwealth, until 1965. She was a teacher and educator for 40 years, but she had to wait to vote. My dad was born in 1919. He didn't get a chance to vote until 1965. He was a veteran in World War II, a banker and an elected official as well. We don't want to wait anymore. We don't want to wait anymore. Give guidance to the map drawers at this point so that they aren't killing themselves, and we're trying to be fair and not reflecting the bottom feeders like places like Georgia and Texas that are reducing the basic American right to vote. And so I would recommend strongly that the commission give them guidance now so we don't waste another day of ensuring that people who look like me have to wait to see if their vote is going to matter.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, Senator
The-
McDougal.
I think in listening to what Ms. Harris said, that there are a lot of things that we can probably agree on. One of the things I said earlier was, and I think there's difference of opinions, but I think there is some consensus around the fact that the Jingles test under the Voting Rights Act requires us to create majority-minority districts where the numbers line up and they're compact districts. So I know from history that we had 5 majority-minority districts in the Senate in 2010, and we had 12 majority-minority districts in the House in 2010. It seems to me that should be a baseline. Compact, contiguous, majority-minority districts that are at least 5 and at least 12. And I think that is, I know it's something I think should happen, and I think it's in line with what Ms. Harris indicated that she believes, and we should move that forward. Where I think I have less clarity in going forward from there is that under that Jingles case, and this is where I think the attorneys had some disagreement, and there are 2 different thought processes. The Voting Rights Act gives us the ability to consider race when drawing majority-minority districts, and not only consideration, says we have to, so we have to make that choice. The question is, then, are we able to consider race outside of a strict scrutiny, and I don't know what that actual is at this point, going past that. So I think when we go on to the other combinations that could come up with coalition districts or the other types of districts where that consideration of race can be a determination, I think I've heard it one way, that jingles, that would be impermissible. I think Mr. Hebert thought that a different way. There's competing views. So ultimately, we'll have to probably have votes and settle that. But I think the one place we can all agree is that we ought to move forward with 5 minority districts in the Senate and 12 in the House. And as we go forward, then as the racial polarizing data comes in, maybe that gives you the strict scrutiny to make other considerations or not. But those are at least the baseline that should move forward. I don't know if that's what Ms. Harris wanted or not, but I said that part in the beginning. I know Senator Locke had expressed some concerns about the number of majority-minority districts when we were here last time. Not speaking for her, but I just did listen.
Senator Barker?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Barker here. I think this is a critical issue, and we need to get it, be working on it as aggressively as we can. And obviously, given that 2 of the 3 maps done in 2011 were thrown out as racial gerrymanders by the federal courts, with the courts actually ended up redrawing the districts. In both of those instances, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we don't end up in the same situation here. As I understand what the 2 sets of attorneys discussed last time, I think it was, there were some things that they agreed on. There was one critical thing that they did not agree on, and that was whether the Voting Rights Act required that you develop a coalition district where you could do it, and it was not something that was already in place. It was not something that was used in the 2011 redistricting. What I will also say, however, is that the courts have, as it relates to the districts that were drawn in 2011, and I agree 100% with what Senator McDougal said. We did draw 5 districts in the Senate that were majority-minority. And there were, I think the 12 is accurate for the House of Delegates then. But what ended up happening was that in the end, there was just one congressional district that was drawn. That was the 3rd congressional district represented by Bobby Scott over the last 30 years now. But in that situation, that was the only majority African-American district that was drawn, and that was, I think, drawable at that particular point. The courts threw out both the Congressional and the House of Delegates maps as providing packing of African Americans in districts that was not necessary to be able to accomplish the purpose of African Americans being able to elect a candidate of their choice in those situations. And actually in the congressional districts, what they did was they took and it was supported by Congressman Scott, took his 3rd congressional district and took it down to less than 50%. And it was they did not feel that that was retrogression there, because it was clear that African Americans could still control the outcome in that district, and then drew an adjoining district, which is the 4th congressional district, now represented by former Senator Don McEachin, now Congressman McEachin. And that also was drawn between 40 and 50%, so they're both drawn in the mid-40s there. I think it's one thing, clearly, as indicated by all the attorneys, to be able to have a requirement to draw a new minority to draw a district where minorities can control the outcome, separate from the issue that Senator McDougal has talked about as to whether or not it has to be all one race, or whether it can be 2 races or ethnic groups that would combine in that situation. But for those, you would have to get to 50% majority in terms of the population. that I think is doable, at least in one situation that I've been working on. And we'll, as soon as I get that finished, I'll make that available to the map drawers, et cetera. I think there is a possibility of adding at least one new district that would hit that 50% threshold. But the others, what we need to do is to make sure that there is not what is termed, and what Senator Locke talked about and what Senator McDougal talked about, retrogression in those situations. And that may mean keeping them in some areas. And what the court said was in the House of Delegates situation, that the district in Southside that is represented by Delegate Rosalind Tyler did require a higher percentage because of the voting patterns in that district compared to the other House districts. So they did see that one differently, and that's the standard, is whether or not, in that case, African-American voters could elect the candidate of their choice. And there was concern that if you lowered the number of percentage of African-Americans in that district, you would get to a point where they would not necessarily be able to do that. And I think that's part of what needs to be factored in with input from the attorneys and from the map drawers.
Madam Co-Chair, I would just
Yes,
want
Ms.
to,
Harris.
Greta Harris would like to agree with Senator McDougal that the current makeup of majority minority districts is the baseline. We can look at the 2020 census and know that we have seen significant increases in the Hispanic, Asian population, positive growth, and significant growth, not as much in the Black community. So the baseline is there, and I think, again, because time is of the essence, that we need to be looking at the changing demographics and ensure that we're being fair. This is less of a legal issue for me. It's a moral issue around how we're going to lead as Virginians to ensure that all citizens, regardless of their skin color, have a fair shake at being able to elect their elected officials. And so if we're instructing the map drawers to look at all this other criteria and not today including the changing demographics and the history of what we have had in this Commonwealth to people of color, I think it's morally just a shortcoming on the part of the commission. And I would, we've debated this, we voted on it, the time is now, I believe, to move forward on it, and would welcome support in trying to give this guidance to the map drawers at this point, so when they're working over the weekend, they consider communities like what I live in right now.
So is there, and this is to all the commissioners, is there, well, we'll see if we have, I know we've only heard from a few people. Is there a kind of consensus to adopt at a minimum this baseline that we're talking about, with knowing we will have some further discussion, but at this point, at a minimum, bringing our current maps up to what it was before, understanding that is a baseline with regard to majority-minority districts. And I think there's two people. We have Delegate Simon and then Mr. Kumar.
So, Madam Chair, when this issue came up last week, I have worked on some language that I think might address this, but I'll wait until some other folks want to weigh in before I do anything with that language. So I'll defer.
Mr. Kumar.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I agree with all that's been said. I mean, this is critical, and of course, it's in the law, right? It's in what's been, it must be considered even more. I mean, political issues and incumbency are part of state code. This is part of federal law, which is even higher, right? And at the end of the day, and so I guess my question in part would be to the legal counsel for both sides who are supervising the map drawing is, why are we getting maps back that are not in compliant with the law? Because I think we agree, not only morally, but in principle, that the law says that we can't have retrogression, but what we're seeing so far is. So, and I think that might help us understand what better direction we need to give so that it's clear that we can't have this in the maps that we're getting. I mean, obviously this is more important than considering incumbency. This needs to be considered and again, it's hard. You can't rank order these things, but obviously we need to increase this opportunity and we can't violate the law.
We'll hear from Senator Barker and then maybe from Ms. Paradise. And I don't know if Dr. Creighton made it on. I know Jerry's not
He's here.
He is here? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we do have counsel. So let's hear from Senator Barker, and then we'll toss it to you. Good morning, Kareem.
Madam Chair, I think it's important that we move forward on this, but what I want to do is to draw a distinction between a percentage, and I think from both sets of attorneys, they said you can't just pick a number and have a specific percentage that's in there, whether it's 50% or 45% or whatever it would be, and that the issue is whether or not you have the opportunity to increase the number of districts that would be minority or potentially coalition, although that's debatable, and is not necessarily required based upon the representations of the Republican attorneys, so that we're moving in a direction of adding there once you get to the 50% threshold there, because that is federal court interpretations. But the issue for everybody else is that we don't do retrogression, which in effect eliminates the ability of a particular minority group or a coalition of minority groups to elect the candidate of their choice.
Okay, Dr. Creighton, you've been listening into a lot of our conversation. There's been some questions posed. I think certainly a question that I have, is it helpful to the map drawers and helpful to y'all if we at least get to a point with consensus on a baseline where we're not going backwards? Which certainly y'all are going to keep communicating and advising your map drawers as you've interpreted the law further.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I have had a chance to listen to what I think is a robust conversation. I applaud it. I want to just mention 3 general points. I think you all are moving definitely toward the space where I think the map drawers and the lawyers on both sides would agree there needs to be some decision taken. I think that we all agree that as a practical matter, race should be one of the considerations in the process. I think the lawyers also agree that race can't predominate among other considerations that you all have adopted, and certainly traditional criteria. That's all the law. What I think you should be careful about, and I want to echo Senator Barker's point, is at the outset, making any assumptions about what the percentage of minority districts should be without looking at data and or looking at the configuration of what those jurisdictions should look like that are part of those districts. So I mean to say we definitely have a benchmark map that comes from 2010. What we also know is that between 2010 and 2020, there was some demographic change. And I think Co-Chair Harris described that in better ways than I can, since I'm not a native Virginian. But the point to make is that as we're making choices, as the map drawers are making choices about how to craft these districts in compliance with the law, and we've done as best we can based on the information that you all have allowed us to consider, we've got to think about whether that change requires some adjustments to the map. We can tell some districts have gained population, others have lost. We also have, as has been stated earlier, new election material that gives us some information, and it's twofold. One, that's been discussed already, the extent to which racial minorities have the ability to elect. And that's evident in different regions of the state at different levels in terms of percentages. We take all of that into account in addition to the criteria about compactness and the like to see if we can craft districts that make sense. That's taking race into account without letting race predominate. Now, I do think that in addition to thinking about majority districts where a non-white group is the majority, there is, I think under the Virginia law, the consideration you at least have to take into account as to whether a coalition district makes sense. Now, these are judgments. They're all legal, but they're judgments that need to be made based on your assessment of a particular jurisdiction, its political history, and the like. So this is the time to start that conversation. And the idea of giving some guidance where practicable could be making an assessment based on what we know about the existing map and its performance and comparing it to potential demographic changes and new district combinations that in the map drawers estimates and perhaps in conversation with the legal team does at least as good a job or perhaps a better job at securing political opportunity. So I would certainly encourage, and I'm sure Jerry would as well, language that takes that into account. And just last point, because I just saw Senator Locke's picture pop up, it is important in the context of incumbency to think about the Voting Rights Act considerations, because even if you craft a district that might meet the general criteria, it would be problematic under the Voting Rights Act to displace incumbents. So in addition to the political equity consideration, it's important to think about the way in which the chosen candidate of a majority might be displaced without reason, or could be moved back into their district as a way of complying with the Voting Rights Act. So I would encourage now there being some statement as to what you want the map drawers to do. Well, certainly all the legal advisors, I'm sure, will help that process, but it would be important to come to some consideration about what you think will be a way of complying with both the Voting Rights Act and Virginia law.
And Dr. Creighton, before we go to Ms. Paradise, is it helpful to even get to the benchmark, to sort of have that benchmark of reflecting back and saying, can you aspire to, at a very bare minimum, which the current submitted maps don't have, to just bring us there? Is that helpful to the map drawers, in your opinion? Is that a step that is useful?
What I would say is, I'd say identifying what the benchmark is and asking the map drawers to give you an accounting of how their map either maintains or betters that level. There's a world, and again, the data will tell us, there's a world in which it's impossible, not necessarily in Virginia, but it's impossible because demographic numbers have decreased to create the same kinds of districts as before. The data will tell you whether or not that's possible. But if it is impossible and you can't craft a majority district or a coalition district, that's the place where you want to hear an explanation for why not. And if that's persuasive to you, then you accept that. But if, for example, in the opposite direction, if there was one district that was possible in 2010, but perhaps there are two that are available in 2020, that too is a demographic narrative that I think you want to hear from the map drawers, give you an explanation, offer you data, and then you can make a judgment. But I believe the direction should be take the benchmark, give us your assessment of whether the maps as you would like to create them do at least as good a job as the benchmark does.
Okay, and can we hear from Ms. Paradise on this issue?
Yes, good morning, Lori Ann Paradise here. As it relates to kind of the prior comments that Mr. Tyson has made regarding coalition districts and the implications of the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, I'll kind of I thought he did a great job on Monday's meeting explaining that, and I will stand by his comments and explanation to the commission. I know we're in a very unique situation, and you're under a very tight, difficult timeline. And this situation, we have these two map drawers, and we've got to find a way in this short amount of time to come together and look at multiple pieces of criteria. So I do understand the complexities that you all are having to face. I do know that there's additional, obviously, that has been referenced, data coming on Monday. And I think as I know the incumbency, we've kind of moved on somewhat from incumbency issues, but addressing what we can at this juncture to give that guidance to the map drawers. And then as we're getting more and more data, updating that guidance, updating that criteria, I think from a practical and efficiency standpoint would be helpful. And I know John Morgan has a couple other thoughts there on some more specifics and how we might do that. So John, I'll kind of let you take things from here.
Thank you. I will keep my comments very limited here. I don't want to get involved too deeply in the legal discussions, obviously. But I would point out this. Dr. Creighton said that there may be circumstances where it's impossible to draw a district at majority-minority percentages that were similar to the benchmark plan. And so I think in the interest of providing more information to the commission, I think it would be a good idea to look at the 2020 demographics of the remedial districts that were for the House of Delegates or the past plan for the state Senate, so that you can see where those shifts has occurred and be well informed about where it would be difficult to make changes. And therefore, again, as Dr. Creighton was saying, you can look at those areas in a totality and say, is this minority community being well served by this configuration of districts, even if, like the previous district was at a certain threshold of African American or other voting strength, and now the current district maybe can't meet that. I think the commission would be well informed to just look at that. So when we talk about numbers like 5 Senate seats and 12 House of Delegate seats, I would encourage you to look at the remedial plan for the House and see if there are 12 seats, as you're saying that there are. There may be 12 seats that are identifiable, but I just think it'd be a good idea to understand what has changed in those areas so that, again, we can have a good explanation of why or why not districts are drawn in that area. Hopefully that makes sense.
Madam Chair.
Delegate Simon?
So I think I have some language that probably addresses what John was asking for, and I think maybe, and I'll just read it out, and hopefully it captures, I think, what everybody's looking for, which isn't to George's point. It's not going to put hard numbers on anything. It's mostly going to provide an instruction to, I'm going to tell you what it does, and then I'm going to say, give you the words, but it says basically to pick a benchmark, which would be the last legally enforceable maps, make sure that we don't do any worse than that, but also provide the map drawers some instruction to be mindful of this, and then when they present their maps to tell us exactly the kind of information that John was just talking about, so that we know that we're going to get, the maps will be drawn with this in mind, and we'll get an explanation of why or why not they had to do it. So, and it comes frankly from, although Section 5 doesn't continue to operate as a check, it comes from what the Department of Justice used to look at when they would do a Section 5 kind of retrogression analysis. So that was the basis for it. So what it says is, no plan adopted by the commission shall reduce or diminish the position of racial minorities with respect to the effective exercise of the electoral franchise. Map drawers should assure that proposed plans do not have the effect of reducing or diminishing the opportunity of minority voters to elect candidates of choice. Such analysis shall include assessing minority voting strength in a proposed plan compared to the last legally enforceable redistricting plan as a whole. Right, so not district by district, but as a whole. In presenting all plans, the map drawers must provide evidence of their assessments and explain the manner in which their proposed maps satisfy this rule.
Madam Chairman.
Is that your language?
Yes, that's my language.
Okay.
Madam Chairman,
Senator McDougal.
Delegate Simon, that sounds like you had a lawyer draft that up for you. So it would take me a while to disseminate what that language said. If it was written out, we would look at it. I'm not going to vote for that language because I'm not sure what it says. And I know on the Senate side, the same people, my Democratic friends in the Senate, drew the Senate maps. They drew the House maps. They drew the Congressional maps. Some of us voted no on all those maps before. So I understand all that. The Senate maps didn't get sued on because maybe some people didn't have the financial resources to litigate that. They might have been different had it happened. When you're looking back at this, I think we have in my mind, we can make there's some arguments that there are legal sides that legal minds might disagree on. There are some things that I think we all agree on. The Voting Rights Act, Section 2 still exists. Jingles test is the law. If that is the law, then we need to craft majority-minority districts. And we know that historically that had been at 5 and 12, whether that's changed. And I think there's some discussion about what it was under Delegate Simon's last legally enforceable definition, which I'm not sure what that means, but I think he's trying to say what the district court drew on the House maps after that went forward. I'm very comfortable saying that the map drawers should come back with an attempt to draw at least 5 majority Senate, 5 majority minority House districts. And if they can't do it or they don't do it, they should tell us why. That seems to be very logical for us to give direction for Monday.
Madam Chair.
But I'm not going to be in favor of the very articulately well-written legal definition that somebody did, that Mr. Simon just presented. I'm not going to say somebody else wrote it, but it sounded very tricky to me.
Madam Chair.
Delegate Simon?
Okay, so quickly, it's 4 sentences, okay? And so this is what you're voting against. I just want to make sure everybody is clear. The first sentence says, no plan adopted by the commission shall reduce or diminish the position of racial minorities with respect to the effective exercise of their electoral franchise.
Delegate Simon, could you send it around to everyone? I think part of the issue is looking at it and reading it again is not going to.
Okay,
fine.
I will make sure everybody gets it, but I'm just, because it's not that complicated. It's literally just 4 sentences. One says, we're not going to reduce the position of racial minorities with respect to their vote. I don't know why you would vote against that. 2, says map drawers should assure their proposed plans don't have that effect of reducing or diminishing the opportunity of minority voters to elect the candidate of their choice. So I don't know why anybody would vote against that. 3rd, such analysis shall include, and here we might going to get, if you're going to get tripped up on something, but I don't think it's that hard. Such analysis shall include assessing minority voting strength in a proposed plan, so whatever their map says, compared to the last legally enforceable redistricting plan. Right? So you don't go back to the 2011 maps because they weren't enforceable because they were struck down. In presenting all plans, the map drawers must provide evidence of their assessments and explain the manner in which the proposed maps satisfy this rule of not diminishing minority exercise of the franchise. Happy to circulate that around, but just be clear to anybody who wants to vote no on this because they're confused. These are the 4 things that you're voting against. And I'll see if I can type that up and email it to the commission. Maybe we can take it up after we hear from the map drawers.
Mr. Brunio.
James Abrinio. So first of all, yes, it is a somewhat lawyeristic language, but I like Mr. Simon's or Delegate Simon's proposition. The other thing is, I worry about setting, and I think this goes back to what happened in Butane Hill, is setting the numbers as we've got to have this many districts and that many districts. I think we set ourselves up for legal trouble there, but also that standard ignores coalition districts. So I would want more legal analysis from the attorneys specifically for looking at specific benchmark numbers. And I think the direction that Delegate Simon is pushing forward makes a lot of sense, and it gives the direction we need. So thank you.
We will hear, hold on. Got it. Let's hear on from Senator Stanley, and then we can see how everybody's feeling. We are about the halfway point, an hour and a half in, so we may want to just take a quick breather and digest some of this. But Senator Stanley, if you want to say something.
And I appreciate my partner over here's statements in that regard. I think what we're all concerned about here, and I think we're on the same page, we just don't know how to get there, is retrogression. That is the most important word in all of this. And retrogression is anything less than the 5 in the Senate and the same number in the House. And that can be considered just even a drop off of 1. And so I think, for me as a lawyer, I see less of a problem by saying that's our minimum, because then we never touch retrogression. We never have that as an issue, because if you want litigation, have districts less than 5 in the Senate that are African American majority, and I think it's not only fair, but it's the right thing to do. So that's all I would be concerned. That's why I would submit that the Simon dissertation it has a good heart, but I think it just creates more issues. I think Ryan, I've sat next to him in the Senate for a decade, and he's a simple man. He writes simply, but where I can spend 4,000 words trying to communicate something, he can be very clear in 10. And that's a compliment to him, which I don't always like to make. But so I think a simpler way of doing it, just saying this is our benchmark of minimums, is the way to go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're going to hear from Senator Barker, I want everybody to get their thoughts out. Absolutely, and then so that you can take a moment and just make sure you're freshly coming back. So Senator Barker and then Mr. Harrell.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and this is Senator Barker. I think that we're on the path to get to where we need to be, and I think we need to make sure that we take a look at all of the districts that have been drawn, both in 2011 and then by the courts in 2 of the 3 situations there, and then look at the data that we have now. But as it relates to the definition and the application of retrogression, my understanding from what was stated by the attorneys at last meeting we had was that you look at the districts based upon the 2020 population. And I think what was stated as it relates to the Senate was that although there were clearly 5 districts that were majority African-American districts that were drawn and authorized in the 2011 redistricting, and they are still, those districts are all still 100% intact. 2 of those districts are in areas where the percentage of the population in the current districts have dropped below 50%. One of those is in the Richmond area, and that is precisely because the percentage of the population that is African American in the city of Richmond has dropped dramatically in the last decade, from about 52%, I think it was, to about 43% right now. And so that did affect one of the 2 districts there to drop it below. The other was in the Hampton Roads area, and I think it was the district that Senator Lucas currently represents, and that one also dropped below 50%, which may have been partly impacted by the prisoner shift, because there were some prisons that were in her district there. So that one is the legal requirement, as I understand it, that those 3 would have to be dealt with. But I think from our standpoint, we clearly should be looking at all 5 and seeing whether there are any opportunities for additional ones. So,
Mr. Harrell?
Thank you. I don't think anyone here wants to diminish the voting capabilities or influence of any minority. Now, the law that has been carefully explained from both sides, and there is a difference, has given us several key points, at least from the Republican counsel, Mr. Tyson, before, and I'm not trying to summarize it except to point out, excuse me, Mr. Brigno, all right, except to point out that we need to be fair to all voters. And if we make race predominant and start moving people around for race, that does potentially violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And that's kind of a key point. And under interpretation of the Bartlett case that's been presented to us, we, as Senator just mentioned indirectly a minute ago, that we can't just take all the different races together and try to come up with a total. We've got the 51% interpretation. Now, there are differences, and the Democratic Council presented an alternative theory. I just think at this point, for us to get out there and make what are, in essence, legal decisions that are affect the critical race issue, then I think we've got the racial polarization material coming in, and by Monday, is that correct? Monday? So I think we've got to wait for that and the legal interpretation of that in order to go forward with any logic at all, rather than just go helter-skelter and start moving around whatever we do. And we're going to have to face this issue. So if we don't do it in a well-reasoned manner, rather than us taking the place of the attorneys and the map drawers in the middle of what they're doing, then I think we're making a big mistake. So I would hope that we would wait for the racial polarization information and interpretations from the council as to how that affects us, and then how we can proceed from that. Because our decisions don't just affect one race, they affect all the people in Virginia. And all the people in Virginia have voting rights too. And they are addressed somewhat in the 14th Amendment. Thank you.
Madam Co-Chair, I would just like to
Yes,
say,
Ms.
Greta
Harris.
Harris. Yes, all citizens have voting rights in the Commonwealth of Virginia and hopefully across the country. But we have a unique history in Virginia where the Voting Rights Act, less than 60 years ago, several of us on this commission would not have been able to vote. And that is real. It's not alternative facts, it's real. And so the demographics in Virginia since 2010 have increased across the board the minority population of Virginia. So utilizing the state constitution and the federal Voting Acts law, we need to release and give guidance to the map drawers to take into account the changing demographics to ensure that minority voters in the Commonwealth of Virginia have a fair shake of electing their candidate of their choice. I mean, the history is crazy, and especially in Southside. So if you're from Halifax, if you're from Danville, if you're from Martinsville, that's where the genesis of the civil rights movement was happening. It happened in other places around Virginia, but that was the ground zero. And so I know firsthand, others of you on this commission who are from that part of the country know that citizens who look like me, who got up every day, went to work, tried to do things to ensure that their kids had a bright future, were denied that just simply because of the color of their skin. Let's step up and do the right thing as a commission to ensure that all citizens, white and non-white, have an opportunity. But you cannot say that we are working on a level playing field here. And given the actual history and the changing demographics of our state. So give the guidance. Don't make us wait not one more day to try to say you need to have an equal opportunity to vote for the candidate of your choice. There's no reason to delay. None.
She got a reply, please.
Yes, Mr. Harrell, you can reply.
All right, I'm not, once again, disagreeing with any motivation, but to say that we should do something in a well-reasoned manner, and because this is all the attorneys have said, this is a fact-based decisions that we make in regard to race, and it's affected by what's out there today, what the votes are today, not 60 years ago. We're not rehashing the past. We're dealing with the best way forward today. And this is not in any attempt to diminish anybody's ability, but we just can't go off on an emotional tangent and try to resolve issues from the past. That's regrettable. That's the past. We're dealing with today and the people as they're constituted today. Thank you.
And the facts for today, Greta Harris, are that the demographics are changing in America. I'm not asking for any emotional decision. The demographics are the demographics. We have that in the census, in the new census.
We are not asking for an emotional
And
decision.
Okay, I want to make, there's people who are talking at the same time now. I want to make sure that we are waiting, being called on in an orderly manner. I know this is an extremely, there's passion on both sides and it's important. So we still want to just maintain respect for everyone who is speaking. Everyone has something to say, and so let's just take a step back. I'm not sure, Mr. Harold, did you finish your thought? And then we'll go to okay. And Ms. Harris, I think somebody started speaking while you were speaking. So what, did you want to say anything additional?
I'm good.
Mr. Abrinio, would you like to comment?
I think Mr. Hutchins wanted to chat, so I'll defer to
Okay,
him.
Mr. Hutchins.
I guess what I would add is the Voting Rights Act compels us to remedy this. So we have to remember that. And even if we're under strict scrutiny, a compelling governmental interest, which is to correct the wrongs, is what we're here to do. And the Constitution compels that, even under the current interpretation. So.
Thank you, Mr. Abrinio. Mr. Hutchins, yes.
Yeah, one thing, I don't think that this has anything to do with an emotional decision, but it has everything to do with doing what's right. And you have to take history into consideration when we're discussing things like this. We'd be making a huge mistake if we didn't. And I think we all need to pay attention to this. Again, I say it again, we've got one shot at this. We've got one job. And as Senator used to say, we need to land this plane and we need to do it in the right way.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. I think it would be a wonderful time for everyone to just take a break, bathroom break, refreshments, and then come back and kind of in the interim, let's talk about some things that we can agree on. This does not have to be all or nothing. There's a lot, and we do want to give some guidance one way or the other. I understand we've already taken votes on other things, but there's other things we can vote on. So everybody take 10.